Just to recap, my name is Amy Gorn. I'm with the Resource Basket for this hour-long training. I'm a team member with the Resource Basket, and we are just going to share this recording with you after the fact. We'll send it out along with resources to everyone. We will have an opportunity to engage with questions at the end of the webinar. All right, so to check out the chat box, as you're joining us online and are viewing as a group at a computer, as I know a couple of you are, please go ahead and type in the chat box how many of you there are and where you're all from. If you are watching by yourself, just write a hello and where you're from. That way we can get to know everyone a little bit. Wonderful. Again, my apologies if you could not hear me at the outset of our webinar today for youth bullying prevention, presented by the Resource Basket and the Alaska After School Network. Now we're going to open up a poll and try out this type of interaction. It's a simple question of just what kind of community you reside in. We're going to try to pull that up. We're having some difficulty seeing that for the moment. We're going to try to find that pod as we have a number of these fun interactions to share with everyone throughout the course of today's webinar. Give us just a moment as we continue to see all of those that are calling in today. Thank you so much for letting us know that you're on the line and who you're with. If you're hearing beeping noises, that is part of the teleconference system of those who are using that audio and are just letting us know that they're beeping in. As we get going with the webinar, we won't be hearing those beeps as often. So thanks for your patience with that. All right, well, we seem to have found our interactive polling question to try this out. And what we'd like to do is for you to select what type of community do you reside in. I realize there's many options in our great state of Alaska. Here's just a couple. So you get familiar with this type of option during today's webinar, as we will be having a variety of these offered to you. Okay, well, we are seeing a good spread. We have about 40% who are in urban settings, about a third for rural off-the-road system, and we also have nearly 20% of rural off-the-road system, giving us a little over the majority of rural participants today. I don't know what other would be, but I want to let you self-identify if those options don't work for you. Well, great. It looks like everyone was able to get a handle of how to use this fun feature that we'll utilize today. And hopefully the next time it will pull up smoothly for us. Okay. We let us see who's all with us today, so that's wonderful. Thanks for continuing to let us know who you're with, where you're from, and if there's more than one of you at your computer and letting us know those numbers. So again, I'm Amy Gorn with the Resource Basket, and our wonderful presenter today is Chelsie Morrison-Heath. Chelsie grew up in Anchorage, graduated from South Anchorage High School in 2008, and earned a BA in Political Science from the University of Arizona in 2012. She has been a community educator at STAR for 3 years. In that role, she presents on a variety of topics to populations of all ages and walks of life. The majority of her time is spent in schools, K through 12 and college, talking to students about different kinds of touches, trusted adults, sexual assault, consent, and healthy relationships. She is an instructor for youth mental health, first aid, and a Green Dot trainer, which allows her to implement the Green Dot program in Anchorage and other Alaska communities. When not at work, you will find Chelsie hiking and biking on Anchorage's awesome trail system. She's done the Gold Nugget Triathlon 11 times, is part of a fantastic quilting group, and is an insatiable reader. Thank you so much for being with us today, Chelsie. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be presenting at this webinar. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about really the idea that we're talking about a behavior, and that's what we're going to start with. But before we do that, I kind of want to hear from you all. So the first question I have, we're going to pull up that poll again. And the first question I have is, what age group do you typically work with or interact with, or what's going to be most relevant to you? So thank you for those who are typing in the chat box. That's really helpful because we're working on that polling system still. But I'm seeing a huge range. So it looks like a lot of teens and young adults, a little bit of elementary. So we'll kind of be talking about a variety of groups today. At the end of the day, when we're talking about bullying, prevention is pretty much the same. And how we can create community norms that are intolerant of bullying. So now we've got our poll pulled up. If people could just select on that, thank you. Perfect. All right, so it's looking like we've got a pretty even split here. All right, cool. So the next question I have for you all is a little bit kind of about what is your role? So what role do you play for the young people that you work with? We'll pull that poll up. So you can see the options are parent, guardian, caregiver, mentor, coach, volunteer, or teacher, nurse, or other youth-serving professional, and trusted adults. All right. So it looks like the majority of us are kind of in that professional role, which is great. And again, it's good to point out too that all of you in that professional role are also trusted adults. And that's something that I always like to kind of remind myself when I'm talking to youth, is that that is part of my role, is being a safe person for the young people in my community. All right. Awesome. So let's get through that. So who am I? Like Amy said with that great introduction, I grew up here in Alaska. I graduated from the University of Arizona, but I came back because Alaska really it's my home. I have a little sister and an older brother. I'm very close to my family, and I like to go on adventures and try new things. I'm also really invested in my work, not just professionally, but also personally. Doing things like prevention, it really does. It gives me hope, and it provides me with a sense of fulfillment and the idea that I am doing something. And so I'm hoping that today we can talk about how we can empower everyone in our community to feel like they have a role to play in preventing violence, whether it's bullying or other types of violence. So kind of to get into that, STAR services, real quick, I always like to just do this so that people know that we're a resource, that we're out there. So the Heart of Stars, our 24-hour crisis line that's been around in Anchorage for over 35 years. That phone number, it's toll-free, it's statewide, so anyone can call in for a lot of different reasons. You don't have to be a direct survivor to call our crisis line. We also have direct service advocacy and counseling. All of our services at STAR are going to be free and they're confidential. So what is said in our office will stay in our office. Same goes with our crisis line. And then what I do prevention education. There's 4 people in our prevention and education team. We are all over the community talking to youth. Last year we talked to over 13,000 youth in Anchorage, which is pretty awesome. And then if you ever want to learn more, please visit our website, staralaska.com. Great information on there. We're also on Facebook, which is kind of fun. We try to keep abreast of the current issues that are happening, ways that everyone can really talk about violence and how we can prevent it. So why is the Rape Crisis Center talking about bullying behavior? And I think it's really important for us to recognize that when we talk about bullying, we're talking about power-based personal violence. And it kind of can fall on a spectrum. So you see we've got this list here: bullying, intimidation, harassment, theft, property damage, physical assault, stalking, domestic violence, sexual assault, homicide, child, elder, older, vulnerable adult, neglect, abuse, and those different kinds. And again, when we think about that spectrum, it's good for us to recognize, like I said at the beginning, that when we start thinking about prevention, there's similar strategies that we can use. So I have a few more questions for you all to start. This is actually just one question. First question is, who in here has witnessed bullying behavior? And you can answer yes or no. Yeah, raise your hands, actually. That's perfect. If you could raise your hands with the little tab on the upper right. There we go. It looks like people are figuring that out. Okay, so we're seeing the vast majority. All right, how about next question? Who in here has ever experienced bullying behavior or been bullied? So you can raise your hands again. Again, we're seeing a lot of people saying yes. And this last question is a little bit more personal. Who in here has maybe bullied somebody else? And if I could raise my hand as the host or the presenter, I would, right? And I think it's important for us to recognize that when we're talking about bullying, we're talking about a behavior, an individual moment in time. So, labels. Who in here has ever seen a sign like this? Right? Or maybe this one. So, the problem with labeling kids as bullies is that it assumes that the behavior isn't going to change over time. It assumes that it's fixed, and that once someone bullies someone else, even if it's just once, that's who they are. It's also important for us to recognize, that question, the third question I asked, who in here has ever bullied anyone else? Do we identify with these signs? Do we feel like this is a way to really effectively reach people? And then the last thing, really, the problem with labeling kids is that it assumes that it's purely the fault of that child. And it allows us to kind of ignore or dismiss other factors that may contribute to that behavior. We know that oftentimes youth will both bully others and be bullied themselves. And so we need to make sure that we're looking at it as a behavior and recognizing that we can change behaviors. Our primary goal should be thinking about how can we increase protective factors and decrease risk factors to make it less likely that this happens. That's going to be a more effective strategy of it than just labeling and writing people off. So, what will we be talking about today? We're going to be talking about the methods and characteristics of bullying behavior. You all were sent a kind of a resource list, a handout that has a list of all of those methods and characteristics, so don't feel like you have to memorize everything I say. That's available for you later. We're also going to be talking a lot about how do we recognize it and how do we respond appropriately. How do we respond in a way that actually does make it less likely? And then finally, prevention. How can we cast that net upstream? How can we look at some of those root causes and make it less likely? So, diving right into methods. And before we do that, does anybody have online, if somebody could type in, do you have a definition of bullying behavior? What's kind of our definition? I like to start on the same page, and I want to hear from you all. Okay, negative behavior repeated over time that involves a power imbalance, belittling another to make themselves feel inferior or superior, intimidation, singling a person out because they're different, someone who makes someone else feel hurt, low, bad. Yeah, these are great. The one that we have a few more people I want to see. A person who uses strength or power to harm or intimidate those who are weaker. Yeah, and you all are really getting right on that. It is about power and control over someone else. StopBullying.gov has a definition. They say it's unwanted aggressive behavior among school-aged children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. The behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. So I have one small issue with that definition. Is bullying something that only happens in childhood? No, right? And I think that you guys are recognizing that as well. We see these types of power and control behaviors in our adult lives as well. So the other thing that I wanted to note about that is that real or perceived power imbalance. It's not always really obvious to us who has power over someone else. And so taking account into the context of the situation, what is their relationship? Who is that individual? That can really help us identify if we are seeing bullying behavior or if we're seeing typical peer conflict. All right, so methods of bullying behavior. I have a little comic here. Hope everybody can read it. If you can, it says, "Hey Calvin, it's going to cost you 50 cents to be my friend today. What if I don't want to be your friend today?" Then the janitor scrapes you off the wall with a spatula. Heck, what's a little extortion among friends? And so I like this comic because, this is how we typically think of bullying behavior, right? Extreme acts of violence, threats, those kinds of things. But it's also important for us to recognize that power and control doesn't have to be overt. When we think about bullying, we need to think about verbal bullying. So that would be things like teasing, name calling, maybe comments directed at someone's real or perceived race, age, gender identity, sexual orientation, physical or intellectual ability. So the next one, we're going to go through these kind of quick, and then we'll talk about some scenarios at the end and kind of get more into this. But social relational. What would social relational bullying, what do you think that might look like? If you could type that into the box, that would be awesome. Facebook. Yeah, right? So we see a lot of that online. Isolating someone. Yeah. So thinking about friend groups. I think a lot of the times we think about movies like Mean Girls, for example, and we say, oh, that's normal, that's typical, that's girl behavior. It's not. That's rooted in power and control, making someone feel less than. Oh, look at that. Somebody said Regina George and Mean Girls. Yeah. Taking advantage of people, right? Texting. We can see it. We see a lot of this social relational stuff happen between peer groups. Yep. And it is. And so that kind of gets us into the next one, right? We see that they intersect, and so it might be also cyberbullying. And so cyberbullying can happen. It can look like verbal or social relational bullying. It just happens online. It's always important to remember that cyberbullying is not something new or completely different than other types of bullying. It's rooted in the same things. It's just kids are using the new methods that they have today. So yeah, Snapchat, Facebook private messages. I put up a little Snapchat icon up there just to remind people, like, we need to be up on what the young people are using. Because if we're talking about social media that they are no longer using, like Facebook, I'd say the majority of teenagers and young people don't use Facebook as their primary way of communicating with their peers and friends. And so making sure that we're aware of how to talk to young people about the type of bullying that they might be experiencing. What about if somebody were to create a fake profile or to maybe create a forum or a group to talk badly about somebody? Could that also be cyberbullying? Yeah. Right, that's that social relational. So what else? What other kinds of methods do we think we might see? Well, sexual. So sexual bullying, again, they all kind of intersect, but it really is when it's specifically about sexually explicit content. So it could be comments about perceived sexual experience or lack thereof. It could be inappropriate touching, sexual teasing, inappropriate pictures or graffiti. We also might see it with cyber, unfortunately, individuals sending photos or videos that were private and are no longer. So the one we typically think of, physical bullying, using physical size or stature, includes actions like, I think it's really interesting because when I think about if I saw bullying when I was in high school, which was less than 10 years ago, but I would always think, oh no, I didn't really see bullying because I never saw physical fights. But I saw a lot of physical intimidation. I saw a lot of people using their size or stature in order to intimidate someone else, to block someone's path, to move them out of the way, to trip them accidentally. And so we can kind of start to see that if we know what to look for. And then finally, property bullying. So this is going to be taking people's things, right? Throwing their books in the trash can, vandalism, displacing items, all of those types of things. So again, these are just some of the methods that we might start to think of. I kind of like to use it as a broad overview because it's not just beating somebody up. It's a lot of different behaviors that we can see. So how do we tell the difference? How do we tell the difference between bullying behavior and typical peer conflict? The first thing that I like to talk about is the fact that it's unwanted. And so we can tell something's unwanted because if one person is clearly not engaged in the situation, right? We have to look at body language. We have to look at the context of that situation. If one person always seems annoyed when someone approaches them, that's unwanted attention. There's a power-based intent. So it benefits the person who is doing the bullying behavior. It might be attention. It might be an audience. It might be that they gain some sort of social power through that. And so when we think about power-based intent, I always like to use it with social relational bullying, and especially thinking about back to my own younger years, and the roles that there was a lot of conflict within our peer group of girls, and putting each other down in order to feel better about ourselves, in order to become more powerful or more popular in that group. Real or perceived power imbalance. So what would a power imbalance be? I think we can think about power imbalance among adults, and it's pretty clear for us, but how could we tell a power imbalance among elementary age children? If you can type those answers into the box, thank you. And so I saw someone, did type in, it is a learned behavior, and that is so important for us to recognize. That's why we talked about the labels at the beginning, is that it's a learned behavior, and if a behavior has been learned, it can be unlearned. And perceived is really important, right? That perceived power imbalance, because we're not always going to be able to tell. Or it's not always going to be what we classically think of as being a power imbalance. It might be that one young person has more social sway. It might be that one person, maybe they do better in school. It could be thinking about, some of those isms that we talk about: racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, classism, right? There's a whole range of things that we can think of, and it's good for us to recognize that youth experience those same types of power dynamics. So intellectual or verbal eloquence, size of posse, that could be something that we would see with that real or perceived power imbalance. Is it something like one kid always gets their way in play? You know what? That absolutely could be. When we're thinking about elementary school kids, if there's one kid who always gets to decide what happens, that individual might have more power over that situation. Who you are related to and how important your parents are in the community. That's huge, especially in some of our smaller communities. Who your family is, I think can really have a lot of impact on young people. Privilege, yeah. So all of those different things. It might be who your family is and what they've done. That could be a way that young people could maybe have perceived power over others. So, unequal emotional reaction. So this really looks like one person getting upset and the other person kind of just walking away like nothing happened. It might be during it, but it's also maybe afterwards. Does anybody know which method of bullying that we talked about? Remember that it's verbal, social, relational, cyber, sexual, physical, or property. Which one of those do you think has the most unequal emotional reaction? Physical or sexual? Does anybody think anything else? Which one might be the most verbal? Social, verbal. Okay, so you know what? I tricked you guys a little bit. It's going to be cyber. And let's think about that. Why do we think that cyberbullying is going to have that most unequal reaction? And we have to think about the context, right? So when you're bullying someone online, you don't see their reaction. You don't have to experience their pain on any level. It's through a screen. The impact of your words is perceived as less. I mean, we see it every single day when we look through the comments section on any newspaper article, right? People will say stuff online that they wouldn't say in person. And we know that kids who are bullied online have a greater emotional reaction because they don't get any positive feedback or support from anyone, right? If they're standing in the hallway and there's a bunch of kids standing around watching a bullying incident play out, it's likely that there are a handful of kids in the audience who look uncomfortable, who are showing that they're not sure about it, but they might not be able to do anything. If they're online, they're not even getting that kind of feedback. They feel like this is actually what people think. And so that's why it's really important for us to recognize and talk to kids about how we can tell somebody, we can talk to a trusted adult if we're experiencing cyberbullying, because it does have such a significant impact. And also talking to the young people that we know about what do we do if we see somebody who is being cyberbullied, if we see somebody who needs support. So the last characteristic of bullying behavior that makes it a little bit different is that it's repetitive, or it has the potential to repeat itself. So when we think about relationships or things that happen with power and control, it is typically going to happen more than once. So with youth, I always like to give kind of the example, how can we tell if something's an accident versus how can we tell if something's on purpose? It's like, oh, well, if it's an accident, they apologize, right? Does it happen again? Not usually. If something is happening again and again, it's good for us to say to you, that's no longer an accident. It's okay to go talk to somebody. It's okay to tell somebody or to ask for help. So if Jake trips Katie once, is it bullying? Maybe not, right? But if it's something that happens every single day, and he also does it in front of all of her friends, and maybe Katie is somehow different, that's where we're going to start seeing those characteristics add up and recognizing that we need to do something about it. Right, Ashley said, did he mean to? Is it an accident? We don't know. We have to start talking about it. Maybe he was testing his waters, right? And that's also something, thank you for bringing that up, because we do find often that kids who bully other kids will pick their targets very specifically. And they will pick the kids that they bully who maybe don't have as strong social emotional coping skills, who maybe won't know how to talk to a trusted adult, or who don't know how to deal with it in a way that doesn't make them appear to be an aggressor in the situation. All right, so maybe they were bullied, right? Again, so that's why we think about behaviors, not labels. You guys are right on it. So what roles do we play, right? In bullying behavior, we usually think about the aggressor and the target. So the person exhibiting the bullying behavior and the person who is the target of that behavior. Who else, though? What other roles are there in bullying? Witnesses, yeah, right? The bystander. They witness the behavior and they make a choice to encourage, reject, or be indifferent to the behavior. And the people who don't do nothing to help. Yeah, and those who encourage, right? So those bystanders, they can be positive influences or they can be negative influences. Sometimes there will be people who instigate the situation and then let somebody else take over. Exactly. What about one more role that we maybe don't talk about as often? What about the role of the trusted adult? Right? And so we have to recognize that every single day, the way that we behave and the way that we treat other people, the young people in our lives are watching us. One of the clearest memories of high school for me was hearing one of my teachers give us a big, huge lecture about how we shouldn't bully other people, we should treat each other with kindness. And then he turns around and he's talking to another teacher about another teacher and essentially bullying this woman and talking about how she's less than and doing some of that social relational stuff. And it was pretty clear to me, like, oh, you don't get it. That you don't really understand that your behavior matters too. And that just because they're an adult doesn't mean that we can treat them as if they're less than. Yeah, some bullies have assistants, absolutely. There are definitely lots of different roles. And so it's about figuring out how we can encourage and engage those bystanders who don't want to see it happen, who are tired of it, and who feel like they could actually do something to try and stop it. Nice work. So, with the role of the bystander, we're going to move into a little scenario. So why don't peer bystanders intervene? And you guys can type into the box if you have any ideas. Fear, yeah. They're scared. They're scared it'll turn on them. They're scared they'll get bullied. Yeah, right? We're seeing a lot of fear. They don't know what to do. And that's huge, I think. They don't want to be bullied. All right. So what I'm going to have you all do, yeah, right? They don't have any social skill support. They don't know how to react. Maybe they themselves are right on the verge of being bullied. So they feel like if they stepped in, they drew attention to themselves, they would make it worse, right? Or they think that they are alone in the perception that it's wrong, that they are the only person who thinks that it's not okay. So now we're going to move into a quick scenario. And so I'm going to have you all read through this scenario, and I want you to begin thinking about those roles and thinking about kind of what makes it hard maybe for one of these young women in this scenario to intervene or to do something to make it less likely this happens. Thank you. Oh, all right, so I will read the scenario out loud because I just realized there's people on the phone who cannot read the scenario. So, Kate, Christina, Colleen, and Corey have been best friends since 4th grade. When they enter middle school, they discover that everyone but Colleen has been put in the advanced classes. Lunchtime conversation is now dominated by the things they learned and what Tommy was doing in pre-algebra. When Colleen tries to bring up another topic, Christina and Kate roll their eyes at her. Corey tries to change the subject, but gets distracted when Kate points out that Tommy was making googly eyes at her during class. That weekend, Colleen calls Corey to see what she's doing. The phone rings twice and then goes straight to voicemail. Colleen tries again, and after a few rings, Corey picks up. Corey tells Colleen that she's really busy today, but Colleen hears Kate and Christina giggling in the background, and clearly hears Kate say, "Geez, why can't she get the hint?" Apparently her stupidity extends beyond math class. Colleen stays in bed all weekend and begs her mom to let her stay home from school on Monday. So who do we think might be the best position to intervene? Was there someone who maybe tried to intervene at this point in this scenario? Yeah, right? Corey tried. She didn't try very hard, right? She wasn't really sure how to do it. She tried to bring up a different topic, but it didn't really work for her. And you know what else happened too? Did Corey start to get isolated when she brought something up? She did, right? She tries to change the subject, but gets distracted. So what role could someone play to intervene in this situation? What could someone do? And it could be one of the people in the scenario, but who else could maybe do something about this? parents, teachers and parents, mom. Yeah, right? So again, we think about her, let's see, Colleen's mom could have noticed that, she didn't hang out with her best friends that she's always been hanging out with. She might have noticed that, she seemed really upset. And so it might just start with a conversation. Keep thinking about this scenario a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about prevention at the end. I'm going to try and weave it back in and kind of thinking about what we could do to really support Colleen in this situation and how we could help her maybe feel more comfortable and deal with this type of behavior, because it's not acceptable. All right, so let's move on to the next scenario. And scenario C. Alyssa moved from Fairbanks to finish her junior year and senior year in Anchorage. Sean is one of the first people she meets, and they quickly start dating. They text 24/7, and late one night, Sean asks Alyssa to send him some sexy photos. She says maybe, hoping he'll forget about it, but he keeps pressuring her. After a week of badgering, Alyssa tells him that she's not ever going to do that, and he stops texting her. The next day at school, Alyssa notices that she's getting some funny looks in the hallway, and people seem to stop talking as soon as they see her. While at her locker, Alyssa overhears a girl say, "Yeah, I heard she sent pictures of her boobs to Sean. What a slut." Alyssa is really embarrassed and goes to confront Sean. "I never sent you pictures. Why are people saying I did?" she yells as soon as she sees Sean. "Well, I didn't want to be the only one with a frigid girlfriend, so I just got some off the internet to show my friends." Alyssa runs into the bathroom crying, almost knocking over the girl she sits next to in English class. All right, so you all can see we've got our scenario up on the poll. I read that out loud. What do we think? So what kind of bullying, what methods or characteristics of bullying behavior are we seeing in this scenario? Oh, we have scenario A pulled up, so it looks like we're going to find scenario C. Oh, we have scenario A twice. That's okay. So you all can just type into the text box. I read that out loud. We see cyberbullying, sexual, right? So again, it's that bullying of a sexual nature that's happening online. We see that pressure. Is there a power imbalance here? Unwanted attention, right? She told him to stop gossip. Giving false information. She has no control, right? And is she brand new to this community? She is. She just moved from Fairbanks. She doesn't know anybody. Yeah. Thank you, Shannon, for bringing that up. So bullying of the boyfriend by his friends to be one of the guys, to be a tough guy, right? And so the one person she trusted has betrayed her. And there's also intimidation, definitely. And this is something that when I go into the schools and I talk about healthy relationships and sexual assault and consent, we do talk about sending photos or videos and what that looks like, and the consequences of that, but also the fact that it's not acceptable to use that to gain power and control over someone else, to intimidate someone or coerce someone into doing stuff like that. Absolutely. So what role could a peer play to intervene? Or who could have intervened in this scenario? The friends, yeah, right? The girl from the class that she knocked into, yeah. She can tell everyone. Girl at the locker, yeah. Right, so we could maybe encourage Alyssa to self-advocate in a way, be like, well, that's not me, he's a liar. But we also have to remember the power dynamics that already exist. If Sean is somebody who's well established in this school, it's going to be, and she's brand new, the likelihood of people believing her when it's something that she technically should be ashamed of, or the way that the perception is that this is not okay, then yeah, it's one of those situations. So folks like believing the bad powerful rather than the victim. Yeah. She could show people their texts, let them see that she didn't send any photos. And again, we can think about that role. I also really like to think about, though, the power of the bystander when we start thinking about these kinds of situations. Because if you're already we're thinking about bullying as being defined by a loss of control, a loss of power. If you have no power and no control over a situation, it's going to be a lot harder for you to self-advocate. And I don't want people to feel like they have to prove that they didn't do anything, because she didn't, and she shouldn't have to. So I think really looking at that young woman that she almost knocked into, right? People, other classmates, maybe someone who's just really supportive, and reaching out to them and saying, hey, can you talk to her? If we're a trusted adult, if we know that this is going on. Yeah. Right? She's definitely the victim in this situation. Even if she had sent the photos, she would still be a victim in this situation, right? Those were private. Those were things that were expected to stay private. Yeah. Empowering teens to know that underage sexting is illegal and say outwardly, I don't have to send you pics if I don't want to, and I don't want to. Absolutely. You know, and that's what we hope. That's what we hope, that every young person is confident and secure in themselves enough that they feel like they have the right to say that. Unfortunately, we know that's not always true. And we talk about how sexting is illegal, but just because something's illegal, does that mean young people won't do it? So thinking again about how we can really reach them to say, we're not going to use power and control to gain something. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Thanks for doing my scenarios. So, and real quick, everybody will be able to download those scenarios. I've got 4 of them and some follow-up questions after the webinar. Amy will send those out to you all. All right. So, the role of trusted adults. Why don't trusted adults intervene? You want to build character? This is what my parents always said to me. We're building character in you. And you know what? Building character is great, but we have to remember that bullying, it's not typical. It's not normal. And we don't want to build character to just deal with power and control. We want to build character to say this is unacceptable, and if I see it, I'm going to do something about it. Yeah, and trusted adults also don't intervene because they're in denial, because they think that it's not actually happening, or because they really like the kid who is exhibiting that bullying behavior. They can oftentimes be, kids who do things like this will often be kids who you're like, I really like you, but the way you treat other people is not okay. And that's why we get back to that behavior. I like you, but in this moment, I don't like the behavior that you're exhibiting. Because it's not normal. There's that imbalance of power, the unequal emotional investment. One person is being really significantly impacted, and one is not. And repeated negative consequences for only one. So we kind of talked a little bit about some of those role of trusted adults with those scenarios. Kind of keep thinking about that. How could an adult intervene? We did it with A. With C, it might be a little bit harder, right, when we're thinking about this scenario with Alyssa and the pictures, because is she necessarily going to tell her parents that, or her teachers? Probably not, right? We know that young people have a hard time talking about their relationships, especially if they're unhealthy. And so trying to figure out how we can encourage other young people to step in and be those positive influences. So what should adults do, right? Let's say we do see a situation. Let's say we hear about cyberbullying, or we see physical bullying, or we notice someone being really upset after maybe a fight with their friends, and their friends seem perfectly okay. We intervene. Yeah, if you two would just knock it off, that'd be great. So the next thing that we want to do after we intervene and we say, knock it off, please stop, this is not okay, we want to assess for physical and emotional safety. And we want to be addressing or talking to the person who seems in the most imminent need at this moment. If somebody seems really physically unsafe or really emotionally unsafe, really upset, that's the person we're going to talk to first. And we talk to all parties separately because, again, it's about power and control. This is why they don't recommend couples counseling for people who are in abusive relationships, because those power and control dynamics still exist, even if there is a trusted adult who's supervising or monitoring it. So intervention with the witnesses. When we think about how we intervene with the witnesses. We just want to talk, we want to get the baseline from them. Who, what, when, what was the sequence of events? Who did what first? Reaffirm that bullying behavior is not acceptable and that there will be consequences, right? Because I think the worst thing that we can do is to not state that this is not okay, to just ignore it. Because if we ignore it, it comes across as compliance. And we problem solve, right? What can we do in the future? With the aggressor, explain why the behavior is unacceptable. Expect minimization, denial, right? These are things that you might hear. But assign consequences that are practical, logical, reasonable, fair, inevitable, they're going to happen, predictable, immediate, escalating, consistently enforced, developmentally and age appropriate. What do we do so this doesn't happen again? Right? Thinking about those solutions. And with the target, listen and believe. Try not to use those deserving or blaming statements. It can be hard because sometimes they come out without even being aware of it. But if we hear something coming out of our mouth that sounds like, oh, well, why didn't you do this? We can apologize. We can go back and redirect and say, oh, I'm sorry. That's not the way I meant to phrase that. Do you want to come up with some solutions together? We want to work together to figure out what we're going to do next time. And reassure the student that you're trying to prevent this, that you're doing something about this, and that it's not okay. And finally, we thank them, because they could have just kept it to themselves. Right? And we always remember that they don't have to tell us. And if they do, it's an honor and a privilege, and that we should feel honored by that and treat it with that respect that it deserves. So prevention, we're going to talk real quick, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. I know we're getting close. Casting the net upstream, right? The idea that we actually have to look at what are we going to do before this happens? And that comes down to universal education and prevention for everybody, not just for the kids who are being bullied, not just for the kids who are doing the bullying. That's how we empower bystanders. And some of the ways that we can do that is through things like agreements or code of conduct. And really the biggest question you should be asking here is, what can we do to make sure that everyone feels safe, respected, and welcome in our community? Social emotional learning, exactly, right? SEL, there's a reason why we're doing this stuff. And what do we do if someone is not adhering to our agreements, is not adhering to our code of conduct? What is the expectation for discipline or reaction to inappropriate behavior? The other thing too with prevention is thinking about that universal education is that we have to establish new norms. And so we can do things like a mission statement that's easily referenced so people see it everywhere, right? It's on the walls. I think of in Anchorage School District, we use Kelso's Choice a lot and CHAMPS. Those are the two programs. I see them everywhere. I've got the signs memorized because I see them so often. It should be something that's come up together between youth and adults, especially when you're talking to teenagers. And that kind of in-between age, because there are things that are happening in their lives that we might not be familiar with, and we need to make sure it's relevant to them. With that, too, it's updated consistently. Some of our curricula at STAR for high schools still say things like MySpace. None of us actually say those words, but it's in there, and so we need to make sure we're thinking about what is actually current. And it's promoted and utilized by everyone. Again, going back to that story I told earlier about my teacher who was bullying the other teacher. If we don't see it modeled, we're not going to do it. And that's what we have to remember with our young people too. It should establish a community and community norms, increase positive interactions, and decrease behavior. One last thing, protective factors. So good to talk about protective factors because they have a more significant impact than talking about risk factors. So this is a really cool resource. I will actually send this over to Amy to make sure that you all have access to it. Actually, I think it's the last thing listed on your resource document. But talking about the multiple forms of violence and what we can do to make it less likely any of them happen. So protective factors to make it less likely bullying happens, nonviolent problem-solving skills, connection and commitment to school, healthy and supportive family relationships, and advocacy and support for those who need it. If we can figure out how to encourage these types of things in our young people and in our communities, we're going to have less bullying. It's the Prevention Institute. Okay, so the name of the resource is Connecting the Dots, an overview of the links among multiple forms of violence. It's from the CDC, their Prevention Institute. The other thing too with prevention is really thinking about normalizing bystander intervention. making that the accepted community norm. And that's just what we do. Be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'm at STAR. There's my email up there. And thank you all so much for being here today. Let's open it up to questions and see what everybody has to say, what your thoughts are.
This is Amy with the Resource Basket, and I hope I'm not blowing up the audio with Chelsie and I both on the line. I want to first thank her so much for her excellent overview and presentation. We are open for questions, as she mentioned, and so as those get through the chat box in the next couple of minutes, those who are on our teleconference line and are unable to access the chat via teleconference, if you are able to quickly send us an email at resourcebasket@ruralcap.com. You can get an email over which will relay to Chelsie in the next couple moments. And of course, we will again provide all of our contact information at the end for any follow-up after the webinar. So please hold on for the next couple minutes. We're going to share those resources with you that you can download, as well as our quick survey link. And I'm going to turn it over to Chelsie for any questions that are appearing from today's attendees.
All right, so I got a good one. Should you kick out or expel the bully from your youth program, or the kid who is exhibiting bullying behavior? I'm going to say no. And that's going to be my first response is no, because you know what, that kid needs support too. And I think if we kick somebody out of a program or we say you're not welcome here, we're cutting them off from much needed support. There are going to be times if that individual poses a significant risk to the safety of other participants, if they pose a significant risk to the emotional or physical safety, that might be a time when we have to say, you know, we've tried consequences, we've tried correcting behavior, we're not seeing a change, we can't allow you to be in our program anymore. But it should not be the first step. There should be many more things that happen before we expel somebody or before we kick somebody out of a program, because they're still kids and they need that support. See, what other questions do we got? Oh, somebody says, I used to put them in a leadership position as it charged them with an important distinguishing task. Built a scene within them and countered some of the bullying behavior. Absolutely. I think that, yeah, that's something that can really help for some youth, right? We don't want to give them too much power over others, as long as it's supported and moderated. Absolutely. Somebody asked, can we share this with community partners? Absolutely, please do. Share everything. This is all stuff that I pretty much pulled together from online, and so if you check out the resources at the end, stopbullying.gov is a really great resource. There's a couple others. That's Not Cool is good for teens. Love is Respect is also really good if you're thinking about healthy relationships and bullying behavior and how they kind of all intersect. So somebody asked, my granddaughter is being bullied at Baxter Elementary in Anchorage. Who would you suggest as a resource for help for her? So Baxter Elementary, you know, she is receiving our STAR community presentations on no, go, and tell, and telling a trusted adult if someone's doing something that makes her feel uncomfortable or unsafe. I think what I would suggest is maybe engaging some of the other parents of the kids that she's friends with. And talking to them, because really the power is going to be in the bystander, the people who witness it from the outside. So you can talk to her about, I think they use Chelsea's choice at Baxter, about, you know, making the choice to walk away, making the choice to go play with somebody else. But you can also let her know, you know, hey, you could talk to your friends and say to your friends, you know, if you see so-and-so coming up and talk to me, go tell a teacher, right? Or tell them to knock it off. And engaging other parents and other community members in that, because I really do believe that the majority of people don't want to see kids or adults or anyone being bullied. So when I ask children why they behaved in a certain way, they often shrug and say, I don't know. What can we do to get the conversation going and figure out the root problem? Yeah, I get this a lot. So I think it's about the questions that we ask. So instead of asking why, we ask what was the intent, or what was the expected, what did you expect was going to happen as a result of that? Did you think that, what do you think, how do you think so and so maybe felt when that happened? Because I think that's a really good way to kind of redirect them, get them into that personal space. Or even if you can't do it with them personally, let's say that somebody was doing that to your best friend. How would you feel? Because sometimes they can get, it can be tricky there. All right, we have about 1 more minute. Start out with small talk. Yeah, right? So you have a conversation with a young person before you just jump right into like, what are you doing? So, hey, what's going on? How's your day going? Right? And that gives them a chance to kind of share with you. Maybe they had a really horrible morning. Maybe their parents were fighting really bad this morning and they're just so stressed out that they don't know what they're supposed to do. And so they came to school and they took it out on somebody else. We do see that sometimes. And so being empathetic and compassionate towards that child, like, I'm not going to say that you're a bad person for doing this, but I am going to say that that behavior is not okay. All right.
All right. Well, we want to thank Chelsie so much in all your very thoughtful scenarios and questions that you brought up with all of us today. I know we could probably spend a lot more time chatting, and so I hope you do take advantage of reaching out to Chelsie after the fact with her contact information on the screen. I'd like to point out once again that we have the survey link, that tiny URL that we ask that you go to. We'll send it in the follow-up as well. It's just 6 short questions, and we always want to hear your voice on our training offerings, and your feedback is much appreciated. In the gray box on the screen that says resources, we have a number of materials provided by Chelsie. The bullying scenarios did not make it here. We will send that in the follow-up email along with the recording of the webinar and maybe a couple additional links like the CDC booklet. We have the fact sheet included that was sent in advance, and then a couple of materials from a group that's out of the greater Portland area called Thrive that might be of interest, posters and positive visuals and graphics you might want to check out. And then again, we also have the copy of the PowerPoint in a PDF form to access as well. So as mentioned earlier, this training is a part of the Supporting Youth webinar series brought to you by the Resource Basket and Alaska After School Network. Our next webinar will be scheduled for August, so keep tuned with us for an approximate time frame and that topic. And once again, we really want to thank you for your participation today and thank Chelsie greatly for the wonderful information
and making this real for many of us who wish to support our youth. And we want to let you know that you can go to our Resource Basket website for more opportunities. Connect with us on Facebook. On behalf of the Resource Basket and Alaska After School Network, thank you. We hope you enjoy the rest of your Cinco de Mayo.